Lifestyle Pirates with Big J and Adriano.
Hello and welcome to Lifestyle Pirates. Today on the show we have Renato Loberto, racing car driver with more than up to 25 years of experience. Has raced in tracks all around the world, including the mountain with Ferraris. He's done work for Lamborghini Squadra, Maserati Corse, Ferrari Corsa Pilota, and lots more high-profile gigs. Now running her own company, Motorkinetic, which runs driver events, just motorsport events, driver sort of coaching.
If it's got wheels, we're involved with it.
Nice. So tell me, first thing off the bat, how'd you get into motorsport? What was the sort of the reasoning behind it? Tell us a bit about that.
For me, I guess for everyone as a kid, you have a parent or someone, you have a first memory of it. For me, I was about 4 years old. We went to the Adelaide Grand Prix. It was in the Formula One, used to be down there. And I remember it being that age because I threw up on my brother in the bus just after we'd flown there. I obviously got like airsick or something, and I threw up on my brother. That was the first memory of it. But back then, and there's actually an old photo I've got somewhere, and I might be able to put it up and link it to the podcast later on. I actually had my legs and my brother's legs dangling over the edge of a grandstand watching the F1 cars go past in 1984, like literally legs hanging over the side of the fence onto the track, watching these cars zoom past. So I think, when you have that sort of upbringing, it probably is a good start. Yeah. My dad wasn't really into racing or anything. He always had like hotted up minis and had some, cooler other stuff over the years, but never really into it. And he had a shop when we grew up right near Lakeside Raceway, which is like a tiny little kind of like club track. Yeah. It used to hosted around in the Formula One in the 60s. So it's got some heritage of the circuit, pretty cool little place. We'd go there every now and again to watch, and we ended up getting a very cheap car when I was 14 and no idea how to use it, no idea how to repair it or anything. Yeah. I literally had some schoolmates come along and just hang out, like as the pit crew, but no one knew what they were doing. We didn't know what we were doing.
And it kind of just stood there and watched.
Yeah, it grew from there. Like
that's what I do now.
We'd go and do practice days, and I'd come in and go like, who was taking the lap times? Everyone would just look at each other like no one did lap times, no one had checked wheel nuts. That's where it all started. And I guess over the time of doing that, you learn from mistakes and you learn how to improve what you're doing. And certainly for me, there was two parts to it. There was the driving the cars that I really enjoyed, but there was also the working on the cars. Even though I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, like even at high school, I would replace my metalworking subjects with making like a new aluminium dashboard for the inside of the race car to move the gauges where it suited me better and change the linkage for the gear stick. And this is what I did in metal shop instead of making like a toolbox or an ashtray or whatever whatever you had to do in grade 10.
No way.
So I actually made stuff for the car, and the teachers were happy with that because I did the drawing, the technical drawing, and then I went through the methodology like we had to do to learn to make something else, but my end product was stuff for the race car.
So that your parents would have missed out on Mother's Day presents, Father's Day presents.
Yeah, exactly. Pen holders and shopping list stuff. And it was all for the race car.
Got zero clutter.
Yeah, exactly right. There's nothing stuck to the fridge at home.
So what was it about the F1? Because I had a very similar experience. Obviously, I don't race cars and stuff, but my family, my dad used to take my brother and I to like the touring cars in the UK and the Formula One. And that sound for me, it just turns me into wherever I hear like screaming engines, it just takes me right back there. And we've done Le Mans a few times.
Oh, awesome.
What was it that kind of triggered you at such a young age that just excited you and were like, wow, I've got to just dedicate my life to this?
I think it's everything you sort of mentioned there. I guess it's the sight and the sound is one of the things of Formula One, which, if you look at recent press that Formula One's got in the last few years when the engines have changed and the noise has changed, that effect that they believe it has on the crowd. And I personally believe that was one of the things as a kid that got me hooked was that sight and sound. Yep. I remember, and you might remember, Adriana, there was the scene of Nigel Mansell having a tyre blowout down the back straight at Adelaide. That literally happened under my feet. Like we watched the car slapping down into the hairpin to sort of peel off straight in front of us. And I actually remember that happening in front of me. Like all of those things were, I guess were things in time that just sort of cement themselves in. And F1 still to this day is like the peak of the sport. And I think if you're a kid that likes basketball or whatever and you went and saw like the Harlem Globetrotters play or the NBA as a kid, that'd be like the memory of the pinnacle of it. And that's probably it for me. We'd go and watch club racing. We'd go to Surfers Paradise Raceway, which is an old track long gone now. Yeah. And we'd watch touring cars and club cars and stuff race. But F1 is like the thing as a kid for me that like really really sort of set in my mind as like, that's cool. Like that's a really awesome thing I'd love to do one day.
Wicked.
So when did you get your first sort of break into motorsport?
It was, honestly, it was that sort of age. Like before I got into, so 14, 15, when we got this first car, I was doing remote control car racing.
Oh, nice.
As like a, a hobby, because that's what it is at that age. But I actually had some reasonable success, and as it happened near where we lived, there was an older guy who was like the importer of a certain, chassis and engine and stuff like that, and gave me an opportunity to run one of his cars at a state meeting, and I did quite well out of it, and actually ended up getting like supplied some parts and things like that to help fund my racing. So I kind of got a glimpse of like it being a career almost. Like back then people weren't making money out of racing cars, I don't think, but that concept of like, shit, I really enjoy doing this, and someone's prepared to give me stuff to make me do it better so that it promotes their product. And I kind of probably got a little bit of exposure to that. And when I started doing this with our own car, having a shit car that was very cheap, doing it yourself and not knowing what you're doing, I'm like, okay, this is going to be hard to get a good result doing what we do. But we actually had an open day with our club, designed to get new people into the sport, but at the same time, team owners provided their cars for these people to drive, right? Because how else do you test the car unless there's a car available? And I drove someone else's car that was there on the day and immediately went shitloads faster than I'd ever gone in our own car, like competitively fast in this car. And I went, oh shit, it's not just me. Like it might actually be them, like it's that, it might be that I've got some potential here. And that was the first time I kind of went, okay, there's actually something here for me to try and pursue.
And how old were you at this stage?
This is 15, basically.
Okay.
So how it happened, probably same as what it would have been in the UK at that time. They had an age cap on getting your racing license. MSA, I think, is in the UK. Over here it was CAMS, now Motorsport Australia. And I got a dispensation to do my first race. I was actually 14 and a half, and it was 16 was the age limit back then. So once I had that license as like an L plater basically, or a P plater in racing, I had to start at the back of the grid. So no matter where I qualified, I had to start last. It was just one of the requirements. And I think my first ever race at Lakeside, pissing rain, like no visibility in an open wheeler, just looking at a red rain light at the car in front. I think I started it was over 30th. It was a big grid of cars because we used to support the touring cars at the time. So there's always big grids at big race meetings. Yeah. And I think I finished 8th or something like that. Wow. And it was just piss. It was probably because though I had like no power, so I couldn't spin the wheels or anything. Like I had but also as I found over my career, the style of driving that I've adapted and learnt is to be very smooth, and obviously in the wet, you need to be smooth and precise with your car, and that obviously, paid dividend for me. So when that sort of happened, I started getting just opportunities. People would say, hey, do you want to have a drive in my car? Do you want to race my car? And it kind of grew from there.
Yeah.
How did that feel? I guess being underage, but being the back of the grid, but doing, your first, doing what you love, but you're surrounded by, let's just say, the big boys, right?
Yeah.
The lights go green first. Like what's going through your mind, man? Like you must have been just smiling ear to ear.
Yeah, well, it's funny, we took off because Lakeside's basically a straight with a small kink at the start of the lap.
Where's Lakeside?
Up in Queensland, so about 20 k's north of Brisbane.
Right.
And it's not a wide track, it's not a long track, but it's got a lot of undulation to it, and it's really challenging in that, if you put a wheel off the track, you're basically into a fence. It's an old school track where there's very limited safety in some ways. And we took off, and it's pissing rain with limited visibility. I'm driving along, and I'm easily going past cars, and I'm sort of doing it. And at that age,
checking the flags.
Honestly, that's what I was doing. So if you disobey red flags or yellow flags, or do the wrong thing as a driver, you can get penalised. And in the situation I could get my licence revoked.
Yeah.
And I was genuinely doing that. I was going past people going, fuck, are there yellow flags? Yeah. Why am I going past all these people? Yeah. And then I just put my head down and just sort of, went for it at that point because I'm like, well, I clearly haven't done anything wrong. Yeah. I'm just overtaking people. And that was, that was kind of a surprise to me. It's like, shit, I'm actually overtaking people. I should probably keep doing this.
So night before race and everything, is there big nerves when you jump in the steering wheel? When do you start? When do you shiver? When do you get focused? How does it feel when you go from pit lane to the front line?
Definitely in the early days, there was a lot of that nerves. Exactly as you said before, John, going shit, this is these are people who are winning championships and I'm racing against almost your idols of the sport at the time. But then further down, it kind of becomes a job.
Yeah.
Like you know what you're doing. Like, with your DJing, when you're going to go out and play in front of a few thousand people, like as soon as you start, you're in there and you're in your zone and you forget about it. So I found the best way was to kind of, and a lot of racing drivers talk about this, like visualize the start of the race. Think like just focus on what you need to do when you're in the car. A lot of what we do in cars when we're racing is a process, how you strap yourself in, how you set up certain systems, on the knobs of the dashboard and all those sort of things. So I'd sort of involve myself in this thought process of just repeating through exactly what I needed to do and what was my goal for that first lap. If it's a short race, it was like just get out guns blazing, just go as hard and fast as you can as soon as possible to try and make up spots. And if it's a long race like a Bathurst 12-hour or something, then there's a different strategy involved. But I'd always be running over that first lap in the car would be what I just keep repeating. And then once that first lap happens, so much can change. So then you just sort of work off that and use your team to help you as well.
Does it make a difference mentally if it's televised?
Well, earlier on in my career, it was probably my first proper sponsorship where a commercial brand had given me a good chunk of money to fund a budget to go racing. For the listeners that aren't into car racing, there's kind of two ways really you get into it. You've got wealthy parents, or you pay your own way somehow, and that could be that you've made your own money, or you've got sponsors to help you. Whether that's a sponsor on your race suit, a sponsor down the side of the car, or something else you do with a brand to get leverage, and good sponsorship all over the car. Televised race at Bathurst. I just done the fastest lap of the race and then had total brake failure going up the hill, thankfully.
Oh, thank
so turn 2, so the top of the first straight, total brake failure on camera. Like they're literally saying he's just set the fastest lap of the race. He's on the move here, just straight into a fence head on, like destroyed the car.
You're like, oh, well, I've done.
And that's on TV. But to be honest, you don't think about it being on TV ever at the time.
Yeah.
The only time we had live cameras in a car during one of the Bathurst races, and you can actually see when the camera's on, like it's like
does it light up
like a red light, like it's recording or whatever, or it's got signal or something.
Don't pick your nose.
Yeah.
But through the helmet.
But I actually noticed it. It was funny. There'd been a huge shunt, and we're under a pace car or a safety car, so it's like 80 k's an hour max. You're just cruising around, and you tend to kind of be opening vents and changing aircon and running through different things on the car. And I remember looking over and seeing the camera there, kind of thing. Go, shit! There's a camera on me. What else have I been doing? You got a helmet on and stuff. But you tend not to. You're so involved when you're in a car at high speed. You kind of don't. You don't think outside.
Was that when you did that Bathurst of all the cameras? Is that with Vicious Rumour Racing?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, one of the Ferrari teams. They're actually a Melbourne-based team.
I'm pretty sure I was in the pit garage next to you with the Abarts.
Yes.
Is it that one?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I was working in the pit crew next to you.
Well, that particularly didn't go well for us because we got written off in the first practice session.
Yeah, I saw the car.
There was a multiple car accident. The team owner was actually in the car. Long story short, he was the innocent bystander in a 3-car crash, but the 2 Ferraris were totaled, and the Audi that caused it just drove off with barely a mark on it.
Typical Germans.
Don't mention the war.
What makes Bathurst tracks so special?
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. So coming from the other side of the world, like, everyone over there would be going like, oh, Bathurst the track we want to go to. And for us at this side of the world, it's like, let's go to Spa or Brands Hatch. Or
the Enduro is certainly on my bucket list. Not so much the what do you call it?
The Supercars
the V8s.
1000.
Yeah. That's certainly on my bucket list to do while I'm here. Yeah.
It's, certainly for Australia, it's the race. It's the heritage of, being the ultimate supercar race. When they were doing 1,000 kilometres in old GTS Monaros and stuff like that, that's big going, they're effectively road cars back then, souped up for racing, as opposed now they're very purpose built. The thing I like about that track is, 2/3 of it's flat out in a straight line. If you look at a data trace, 2/3 of the lap is absolutely flat to the floor with no steering. It can get boring. But the middle third of the track, where it's very, very hard to overtake, it's blind corners, blind crests, and you're doing 230 k's an hour at points. Like, it's super committed, super committed. And in the modern,
scary.
you don't think about it at all. I've never been scared driving. Maybe for about a tenth of a second before I fenced the car, I was scary when I had no brakes because you're like, well, I'm fucked here.
Exactly.
But honestly, otherwise, you don't even think about it. You just
People don't realise how steep that mountain is, though.
super steep. Yeah, we
Like
do a
if you
track
fall
walk.
over, you're rolling.
Yeah. We do a track walk there before any big races. Any track in the world, you'd do this. You'd walk the track with your engineers and potentially your co-drivers. Talk about what curbs you can hit, what runoff you've got in areas to maximise if you need to. Different overtaking opportunities. You're kind of like you're walking the track literally at walking pace to see it. And when you do it at Bathurst, you get to the top of the hill and you're like, fuck, just sort of sit down and have a lay down kind of thing. You're halfway there, and exactly as you just mentioned about if you fall over, you roll down. One of the years, probably 2 years after you're up there, we were doing the track walk, and we got a third of the way up the mountain, and we started hearing PA calls saying the track walk's been closed because of an accident. Like, we're all walking here. What's going on? A council worker in a ride-on mower had basically a failure of something on the system in the systems in the ride-on mower, and has basically careered down the hill full tilt, hit the wall, and got ejected over the barrier. So police, ambulances, like it was a full-blown accident in a ride-on mower.
Was he all right?
I think he was fine. I think he got taken away with a broken something. But man, the banter on social media was epic.
Mate, the accident log.
Yeah.
John Deere had an accident. Turn 4.
There was these massive skid marks from this ride-on mower into the fence. It was shouldn't laugh. The poor guy's probably having nightmares over the whole thing. But
Barry, if you're there, I hope you're all right, mate.
but that track is probably part of it as well is the fact that it's got these long races that happen there. There's sprint races that happen now, but historically it's been a 1,000K race, which goes for 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever it used to be. And, of course, the 12-hour race. And what I think tends to happen with those longer races is it becomes a storytelling thing. Every team's got a story about their success or failure at the event. And it is a massive, massive effort to get a car, pounding around there for 161 laps or 400 laps or whatever we do in the GT stuff now, 300 and something laps. It's an amazing effort, and I think that's probably part of its epicness in a way, like the Nordschleife or Spa 24. They're an amazing piece of bitumen. That's one part of it, but what happens there is probably the other part of it. It's just such an epic place to go and race a car.
Yeah, cool.
Weather and all sorts of, and the crowd as well. When I fenced this car with no brakes, the first thing that happened when I looked up, there's a bunch of guys that have made their own scaffold grandstand in the property next to it, all sinking beers. And I'm like, there's some I've just gone 170 into a concrete wall. I'm like, cheers guys, thanks very much.
I mean, how does it, this is going to sound like a dumb question we're going to ask. How does it feel to crash a Ferrari?
Well, this wasn't a Ferrari, thankfully. I've scratched a mirror on one once.
We've all done that.
But I can tell you this year, Adriano and I were talking when we had this car crashed in there, it's not only, you as a driver, you go, fuck, if we don't get this fixed, and that car was done. As soon as it turned up, we knew we were out. Yeah. As a driver, you go, that's a shame, not going to start the race. But I actually thought and felt far worse for the guys that put the car together, because for a race like that, it starts months before. Yeah. Fully pull the entire car apart, literally back to a bare shell. Every single part gets lifed, meaning how old is it, how much use has it had. The whole thing gets reassembled and every nut and bolt checked. And this literally happens for 2 or 3 guys for months before the race. And then that really broke my heart, was seeing those guys see the car and you're like, fuck, they've put everything in to be here this weekend. And then when you can see it and go, even if we had parts, we couldn't repair the car in time. That's pretty hard, to be honest. And obviously, if you're the team owner and you're paying all the bills, that's probably hard for different reasons.
Definitely.
I mean, that's a hell of a lot of pressure on you, isn't it? Or the driver in general. I mean, that's obviously it's a team sport, but the driver wears everything, right?
Yeah, and that's and obviously in terms of wearing responsibility, the old excuse book for drivers is very, very large and cumbersome. There's a lot of reasons why shit happen when you're driving a race car.
Yeah, of course.
But financially, there can be situations where a driver's liable. So you might have insurance as part of your contract or something to cover X amount of money for it or whatever. If you're the owner of the team and you're wearing the whole cost, that's a different part. And there is a big responsibility is to the crew, the people that have built it, to the sponsors that are on the car, and to the team owner. but probably also, just as importantly is if it's an endurance race, your teammate.
Yeah.
The most important thing you can do in an endurance race, in my opinion, is,
Stay on the black stuff.
Yeah, is if you get the car back in and you're first, awesome, and you hand the car to them, brilliant, good job. If you pull in and you're 10th, but you were 20th and you've got it to 10th and you haven't put a mark on the car, just as good a job, there's no point, it's the finish first you must finish. You have to give the car to your teammate in the condition that you received it to have a chance.
Yeah.
If you bring the car in, it's got something hanging off it or the bonnet's loose or whatever, you're going to lose time, you're going to lose performance. It's just going to be, like boxing with one arm behind your back. You're just going to be up against it the whole day.
Yeah. Yeah, fair play.
So I got to ask. So I didn't actually know this about you until I did a bit of research on you, even though we've known each other for quite some time now.
Hang on, what website was this? Yeah. I just want to know first. Switch the camera off.
Turn the camera to the black couch.
Yeah.
No, so
I was young and needed the money.
Yeah. Actually, a motorbike accident.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had a big motorbike accident.
Big one.
Eh?
Yeah, big one.
Shunt.
Yeah. A lot of reasons the bike accident, happened, but had a big accident. Managed to snap my left arm. Basically, there's a whole bunch of scars and stuff here. Snapped my left arm about halfway down the humerus. And when I say snap, not broken, is the bone kind of tore away in two. My arm actually went. That part of me kept left of the keep left sign, and this part of me kept right of the poles. So the big steel poles, which are probably about 100 mil or something like that, just snap the arm in two. And typical stuff when you're that age, you don't have all the right safety gear. And I had a helmet on, of course, and I think I had gloves, but didn't have other stuff on. So lots of abrasions, and they class them as burns, but like grazes and asphalt
rash.
Burns and gravel rash and stuff like that. So that was a big one. That was, what was I, 19 or something like that?
Nice, okay.
And that was, snap this, and there's a nerve that runs down the back side of your arm, kind of to the top of your hand, which is called the radial nerve. And what can happen in major arm trauma like that is you can sever the nerve, so cut it and it's dead. You can stretch the nerve or bruise the nerve, they refer to it, and that's what had happened to me, thankfully. But they didn't know at the time. So when I was picked up on the ambulance, my arm was basically, this is for all the camera viewers at home, my arm had snapped here. This bottom part of my arm had rotated that way, but then turned. So my arm went like that, and my hand was up here somewhere.
Waving to people behind you.
Yeah. So it was up there. So they kind of put me on the stretcher and into the ambulance, and they had to slide me on the bed. I remember this because my arm was sort of, getting in the road. So at the time, obviously that hurts a shitload. You get a couple of green whistles on the way into the hospital and all the gravel rash and everything on me. But that was probably the worst part of it was the arm, and it took them quite a while to do the surgery. Just as it happens, and I can never remember the guy's name, but he was the head orthopaedic surgeon in the Royal Brisbane at the time. The same day that I had the next morning, that I woke up in hospital, they stabilised me on his way into work, into the hospital, and he's the guy that would have done the operation. He got hit by a car and was paraplegic. So, literally on the way outside the office, outside the hospital, he got hit by a car on the way. And so that whole ward got turned upside down over a few days trying to get people in. So I ended up staying for over a week with this arm that badly broken. They sort of, moved it back and stabilised it with a basic cast, but no looking into it. And I had this operation, and they said, thankfully, the nerve's still there. We just have to basically wait for it to recover, if it's going to recover, because a nerve can die after that sort of trauma as well.
Right.
I don't know if the science has changed on it since then, but what they gave me was the neurologist said it's 1 millimetre per day away from the heart. If a nerve's going to recover, it'll take 1 millimetre per day for it to recover and regenerate and provide feedback to the brain, basically.
Right.
Which, they sat down and did the maths with me and measured it, and it was about 18 months or something like that they were saying. So I'd have about 18 months before I'd know if I could use my arm again.
Wow.
Which obviously at that age is pretty full on.
So you were 19?
Yeah, 19, I think, yeah.
So still racing as well? So I'm assuming your career has had a bit more of a trajectory. So that
I wasn't racing. I was racing, but not as much as I had been prior, mainly because I was studying. My Dad had never gone to uni or anything like that, but I'd always focused on the learning side of stuff. Like I remember having an opportunity to do my first ever race at Bathurst, and it was when we had to do our OP, which is like what do they call it, HSC down here. In Queensland at the time, it was 2 days of like testing. You go and sit in a big hall and you would do everything. I had my first opportunity to race at Bathurst that week, and I gave it up to go and do the OP thing. So I couldn't get an exemption or anything to do it after, or it all has to happen on the same day. So anyway, I'd always focused on the schooling stuff, but I was getting back into it properly at this point. Yeah, and then that happened. So, but it kind of knocked me around more than that, in that I spent 3 months in traction. So in bed with your legs and arms and stuff up on ropes.
3 months.
Yeah, because I'd smashed all my feet up in the process of it. All the gravel rush, I had about 50% of my back was 3rd-degree burns, was the classification of it. So that took quite a while to recover all the skin. And then, the arm was a big one. That was a lot of physio. So that was about roughly 2.5 years before I could do that. Basically, I could move it again. So what I ended up having to do was I had my arm in a sling, and I'd just rest this arm on this shoulder to walk around. Otherwise, it would literally just flap around. And then every time I would sit down and do something, I would take it out straight away, and I would sit there and I'd be doing my physio. Yeah. I'd be stretching my arm, or I'd have like weights or something I'd hold, and I'd hold it there because I've actually got a bit of a bend in the arm still, like it doesn't fully straighten out.
Yeah, me too.
And I've got and I've got no feeling in the hand basically past where my watch is, so which makes it interesting, for driving cars and stuff like that. So I've got pins and needles on the back, and then nothing on the underside here. So
still to this day.
Yeah.
You left or right-handed?
I'm right-handed, thankfully. So it's just like pins and needles sort of feeling. But again, you don't think, you just kind of get used to it. And back then I was playing a lot of music. I was playing the guitar a lot, and actually had once this all started moving, I was actually playing the guitar. I was actually like sitting there and I was putting a finger on at a time and then holding pressure on there and then like trying to play chords and whatever else. And so I was doing a lot of that when I was sitting at home recovering, and that kind of helped the fine motor skills of the hand. I'm still a bit clumsy, but it's good enough to do what I need to do.
How was that for your mental health going through all of that?
Pretty hard, because at that age, like everyone's going up, partying, you get your first cars and you're driving on the road and you get your freedom kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was really hard because it took so long to recover as well. Thankfully I was doing I'd finished some study and I was doing IT kind of work. So I was able to, actually was doing help desk stuff. So I was able to sit there with, one hand on the desk and the other hand using a mouse and one finger typing and stuff. Yeah. So I could actually still do some work, and that was good at getting you out and just talking to people. And, if you I reckon if you had a real major one where you couldn't walk properly, or you'd lost mobility for a period of time, that'd be really hard because you'd feel restricted as well. Mm-hmm. Kind of like we've just gone through with this whole isolation thing, like you can't help but feel a bit useless when you can't go anywhere and do it. Mm-hmm. I was able to still at least get out. And my sole focus then was, well, they've told me this could still work at some point. So if it can still work, I'm going to make it work. Yeah. I'm going to try as best I can to do it. And I was going and doing 4 days a week at one point of hydrotherapy at the hospital. I was doing physio every day, 7 days a week, either by myself or with a physio at the hospital to try and do it. And there was a breakthrough on one of the days where they did this test, and I don't know if it still exists, but I basically had to put like one hand under the table and one hand over the table, and they would send electrical impulses to both hands, and it sort of plays a bit of a trick on your brain. Effectively what they would see is a little blip on a screen that would say that your nerve is picking up those messages. And they were doing stuff, they were like touching this hand and touching the other hand underneath, and even though you can't see it, they call it phantom pains or phantom feelings or something like that. So even though you can't see it, it was tricking your brain to basically see if it would register. Yeah. And they did it one day, and they said like it's it's down to here somewhere. And my arm still wouldn't move at that point, but the nerve had actually recovered, like on track with what they were saying. I was like, shit, it didn't feel like it was working, but it is actually working. Yeah. And that really gave me a shot of adrenaline. That really put me in a positive mindset that my arm might come good again. So,
wow.
I shouldn't say this, but statute of limitations probably is fine. I was given by my physio. So at this age, like we lived 45 minutes drive from where the hospital was. my brother was at uni, my dad was at work, and I kind of had to look after myself to get myself in and out of hospital. I had a little 5-speed manual, little Mazda shitbox hatchback, their first car, and I had a wrist brace I had to wear, which is like, this long with a metal bar underneath to hold my hand up so it didn't affect the nerve. I glued, araldite a half a tennis ball on the underside of it, so I'd hop in my manual car and I go on the gear stick, and I would to drive manual because I was having to do this and steer, which obviously, having driven a lot of cars at this point, I could do, but this is going to be way easier. So, so what I would do is I bought 2 of these things. I went into the hospital and said, "Oh, can I get another one, please, just so I can keep a spare?" And I left one in the car.
This is my racing one.
Seriously, I'd hop in and I'd get out of the glove box and I'd pop it on, and then on the gear stick, and then I'd drive off
like a Lego man.
Yeah. So you figure out how to adapt, and looking back at it now, it was probably a lot harder than I appreciate it being, now. But at the time, my mindset was, they've told me I can do this, just do it, like just do everything you can to make it work and crack on with it. So,
do you still ride now, or did that
I had my first child 3.5 years ago, and just after having my first child, I actually bought a motorbike again. Not the opposite, most people say the kids are coming, you got.
Now's the time.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's my chance. No, I actually looked at it as well. We need a second vehicle to get around, like for me to get the meetings and stuff. And I rode it, and in Sydney, I was having like near misses every day. Like I ride slow and sensible, or drive slow and sensible on the road as well. But just the awareness of bikes is just horrendous over here.
It's horrible.
So bad. And
it's horrible.
And I believe it got worse when they allowed you to lane filter, or when they legalised that, because more bikes were doing it, more cars were getting the shit. So I was getting closed out by people when I'm lane filtering.
I never understood why people do that though. It's like in Australia, people are so possessive of their driving.
Yeah.
It's like no, this is my lane.
Yeah.
Because me, I ride bikes as well.
Yeah.
And when I lane filter, you get assholes, and they're usually in like Commodores or something like that, and they just pull out in front of you, and it's like, if I have to wait, you have to fucking wait.
Yeah.
Are you serious? I'm just trying to get through,
Yeah.
That's why my bike's extremely loud. You feel like Moses, like you're just parting the reds, like you just ride down the lane.
Sounds
and
like
everyone's
a Chinook's flying over.
Best.
But I had a bike, and then I actually sold it just at the start of the year. When all this kicked off, I thought probably not going to get a chance to ride much, so I just flicked it, and I probably won't buy another one, to be honest. It's the risk of someone doing stupid in a car and you being in a car and getting that kind of injury, very minimal in a car, Whereas on a bike, you just get hammered into whatever. So
definitely after going on the track as well with a motorbike, you jump back on the road and you're just like, it's not really worth it on the road.
No, you don't get that same adrenaline rush or buzz. Or
definitely not. So,
go on.
Sorry, mate. So I just got to ask, moving into a segue, Motor Kinetic, how did that start out? So that's your own company?
Yes, yeah.
So tell us a bit about that and how it actually came about.
When I had this brake issue and crashed a car, I was doing IT for a big property company, and had an opportunity when I was there working with them to do a couple of kind of like Australian Idol for racing cars. Like everyone turn up, you all get to drive the same car over the course of the day, and depending on how you go, you might win a prize to race the car for the season. I did a couple of them, did really well. One of them ended up coming second. We should have got a prize, didn't get a prize because it was the largest cocaine bust in Australian history at the time. The guy that ran the series got thrown in prison, so now it ended.
Yeah, right.
So that was fair enough. Yeah. But then I got an opportunity to do another one in the UK actually, which involved me having to obviously be over there to do it. Very fortunate. I guess it's something pertinent to your listeners. At the time, I had a good job. I was paying back leave from another medical issue earlier on. The company had let me take leave without pay, and I was sort of paying the leave back while I was working. My boss was an ex-Wallaby captain, so professional sports person, and I went in and spoke to him and said, "Look, this opportunity's come up. It's in the UK. I'd have to leave my employment to do it because it's 3 to 6 months just for the competition part of it, and then longer if it goes well." And very thankful. His name's Paul McLean. Very thankful of Paul. Basically said, "Go and do it. Like, what are you standing here for? Like, if I didn't have someone who was that professional sports person and it was the typical HR kind of boss." Yeah. I'm not saying HR, but like a boss who wants to keep his employees because of the overheads and changing and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It may not have happened. There was no doubt in my mind after speaking to him, It was like, go and do it. You'll regret it if you don't. This is what you need to do for your sports career. Pursue it. Easy for him. Thankfully, my wife at the time, she was, well, girlfriend, wife now, she was studying.
Whoa.
Thanks for clearing that up. Just the same person, yeah?
Yeah, same person. Yeah, same person.
Love you, honey.
But I went home and said to her, she was doing a lot of studies. She was doing her master's at the time, so she was buried in books. And I said, you know, what are the chances of me doing this? And she was keen on me doing it. So packed up and went to the UK. Long story short, I got exposure to an industry in the UK and Europe, which is massive. The automotive event scene is huge over there. Things like Goodwood Festival of Speed, 300,000 people in a couple of days, like huge scale. But not only that, the regular drive days that happen at Silverstone and, you know, all the tracks over the UK, huge, in Europe as well. And when I was there, I kind of did that. You know, I was like an employee of mine now as the instructor. I was in the passenger seat coaching people in cars. You know, in my mind, that was the best way for me to get exposure to the UK tracks, was to go and spend as much time as I could there working, and my visa only allowed me to work in the industry as well. I couldn't do any other work. So I did that, and the GFC hit. So I came second in that competition as well. The GFC hit, and it was with Renault at the time, and Renault pulled out of everything but Formula One.
Yeah.
So that basically gave me 7 days to leave the country and come back to Australia, because my visa was pegged around me doing that sport. So I had to leave and came back, and then I didn't have my IT job. Obviously, I'd walked away from that. I'd been looking for a change because I've been doing that for quite a while, and I sort of sat there and went, well, that industry was pretty big over there. I'd made some good connections. I'd done some stuff with Top Gear and those sort of people on the other side of the world. So I sat down and put my thinking cap on, and what sort of transpired, and, you know, it was probably exponential growth in some ways, or, you know, or the scale of what we did, because some of the first major stuff we did was an event for 40,000 people for Top Gear in Sydney. And that's sort of what gave me an underpinning to grow the business to what it is now. You know, we kind of do maybe once every year or once every couple of years a big, large-scale event like that. Because it takes a lot of time, a lot of administration, a lot of overheads for me to kind of take on events of that scale as well. Yeah. But the bulk of what we do is automotive events for car manufacturers and the dealers that support them. So which is how I met Adriano through Ferrari, Maserati, etc. They'll do a day where they want to hire a racetrack. Owners can bring their own cars out, and we provide the expertise to help, you know, them learn to drive their cars safer and faster, and whatever the objective may be. Yeah. And that happens across, last year we worked with 15 different manufacturers, so some of them are direct competitors as well. But we've sort of, you know, carved quite a good niche for us where we can do everything from really small, high-end bespoke to massive mass public, and everything in between. And that really happened from that exposure of 6 months in the UK. Yeah. That didn't... an agency, if you want to call it that, an agency like that didn't exist in Australia. There were heaps of guys throwing track days once a month, and that still happens now. That's great. You know, it's a great outlet for people, but I wanted something that was more than that. We can have a manufacturer come to us. We want to launch a car, and we kind of want to do this. We go away and come up with something really creative to make it happen, and then, you know, and then execute it basically as well.
Awesome. What tracks did you get to go on in the UK?
Honestly, there's nothing in the UK that I didn't go to that I wanted to. With the competition, there were Croft, Snetterton, Silverstone, Short. Silverstone, Brands Hatch Short. I think they call it the Indy circuit as well. Never got to do the long one in the competition, and they did that on a track day. But for me, the bucket list was all the F1 tracks. That's what I wanted to do firstly, is all the historic and current F1 tracks. I've got to go up the Goodwood Hill a few times. I've got to do Goodwood Circuit a few times as well. Did an epic track day with a guy who kind of I knew from Australia through Maserati driver training, actually. It was an NZ guy based over there, and he said, I'll come to a track day, you know, you can help out around there. And this is like, there's people flying P-51 Mustangs, Spitfires and Corsairs into the track, like historic warbirds. Rather than driving there, they're flying their plane in and then driving their, E-type or D-type Jag or whatever it was.
Did you do the Goodwood the Revival Festival?
No, unfortunately, I never got to the Revival. That really shit me, because that's an event, and I've still not been. I've seen heaps of imagery from it. It's an event. I had for the viewers that are listeners, probably doesn't mean much, but the Goodwood Festival of Speed is like the mecca of automotive events in the world. Like it is the place to be. Yeah. back in 2014. So when I came back to Australia and had my business going, running these major events, I actually had a heads of agreement with them to bring the event to Australia.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
To run it in Sydney as well. And the concept was somewhere between Festival of Speed and Revival. It was kind of a blend of the two, taking in, and I'm not going to say Australian nostalgia because a lot of people think, oh, V8 supercars, which is fine. That's a big part of motorsport, but it was actually a lot broader than that. It was a lifestyle event as well as an automotive event. Unfortunately, when all this was sort of happening, they had a huge boom over there with that event, and they just wanted far too much money. The government, it was just obscene amounts of money to make it possible in Australia. We wouldn't have got the crowd numbers, but that is an event. The Revival is an event that is just epic, just unbelievable. They're building historic buildings there for it. They've got historic petrol stations. That even the companies that are trading there now are making the same version of the product new, but like it looked in the 60s and 70s.
That's fantastic.
It's unreal. There's nothing else in the world like it,
In your short time in the UK, did you, in terms of the Australian racing scene and the enthusiast, the spectator, is there a difference between the two?
Massive,
and I guess the reason I'm asking is because, my time over here, there's obviously that V8 culture, the big V8s and the kind of muscle car culture. And I think being in the UK, we have, whilst we still have enthusiasts, there's a different kind of culture because we have a lot more of the European influence.
Pocket squares.
We have a lot more of the European influence. There's almost like the hot hatch culture and all that kind of stuff. Did you witness a difference?
Absolutely. And probably from putting my event hat on, the biggest awareness of that is in the crowds. If you go to a supercars round, you might see 15, 20,000 people or something at a big event, a big normal event these days, couple of hundred if it's a street race or something, big festival atmosphere. If you go to a national round of Formula 3 or Formula Ford or, the second tier supercars or something, there isn't crowd.
Yeah.
The people that are there are the pit crew, and there's maybe a couple of hundred people who come in and bring their own eskies and sit on chairs, and that's it. In the UK, it's pissing rain, it's winter, and there's guys racing old Mark 1 GTIs around, and there's a crowd. There's thousands of people there, and that to me that was the biggest difference. They are the true enthusiasts.
Yeah.
They're the ones that they get up and they'll go there regardless of it. They'll walk through the pits and chat to everyone, and it's a big difference and that's still to this day over here. I just don't see that happening over here. And to be honest, I don't see how that's going to improve, regardless of the whole COVID-19 thing, with the inclusion of things like live streaming and because TV was TV, only certain race events could afford to have it, whereas now it's very cheap to go and live broadcast a race meeting. There's many people that are doing it, and I think that's probably going to change that even more. So people don't have to travel to see it; they can just watch whatever they want.
Yeah,
it's a different feeling, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the sight and sound, especially the old stuff, the new stuff's getting a bit tame, but seeing old cars where they're sliding around a lot, there's actually properly squealing tyres.
Yeah.
Depending on the car, you can still see the driver in the car, working the steering wheel.
Big steering wheel.
Yeah, that's really, to me, that's really cool. And I think that's certainly if I took my kids to a racetrack or something, seeing that sort of stuff would be interesting to a kid these days.
Yeah.
Seeing the modern stuff that's poster stuff, awesome. But I think that whole kind of feeling of involvement in the sport, if you can see the driver properly, if you can get to talk to people and walk through the pits, giving people access is so important to it.
And how important is it? So you mentioned earlier on about Formula One being the pinnacle, and it's it's normally where the technology kind of comes from that in road cars. How important is the kind of V8s and the touring cars from an attainable side of things, from an audience pace, because a lot of people will go, well, I can never afford a Ferrari, I can never afford a Formula One car. But actually that V8 Commodore, I remember as a kid, you're kind of talking Steve Soper, Andy Rouse days in the UK, where you had Sierra Cosworths, the Volvo 850 wagon was going around.
I just brought that as a Hot Wheels yesterday. Really? Yeah, no joke. Target, anyone listening, it's $3 at Target, gold.
Done. Should have brought it in, we could have played with it. But how important, I guess, is it to have that level of car where it's attainable for people to get, to keep people interested?
It's a very good question. Because there's two parts. There's me as a kid with photos of F40s and Lamborghini Countach and stuff. Well, that's the halo stuff, holy shit. But at the same time, we would go to a local race meeting and you'd do exactly that. Oh, that's like your car, Dad. Or, you'd see stuff on track. And I think that's really important because certainly with the track day culture happening, people will go and watch a supercars round, but then they'll go and do a track day in their GTS Monaro or whatever they've got in the garage, Holden R8 or, XR6 Turbo, and they'll go and do a track day in the same kind of car as what they're seeing on TV. I think, without getting into the politics of it, the sport in any guys, British touring cars as well included, the basis of the car, it's a Holden, it's a Opel, it's a whatever, is the same from a marketing point of view, but the nuts and bolts of it are getting, very, very different, more and more distant to what the cars are. Look at DTM in Germany and Europe, they're Audis and Mercedes and so on, but they're so far removed.
Yeah.
They're more like a Formula 3, Formula 2
if you take
car.
off the front clip, it's not a normal car under there.
They're amazing machines. And, they still look like it. But I think part of it as well, to come back to your question, is not just the car, it's the driver. It's like a footballer changing teams. They still follow that footballer and they still follow the team if they really love that team. It's probably very similar, I think, in supercars. The likes of a Craig Lowndes jumping between Ford and Holden, that sort of stuff happening, and even Brocky in his career raced a Ford occasionally. That sort of stuff. They still follow the driver. They still have an attachment to them, but at the same time, there's probably more of a longer running emotional attachment to the brand of the car. I reckon because of a family connection. I wouldn't say I'm a Ford or Holden guy necessarily. I don't sway one way or the other. But growing up, we had Fords.
Yeah,
our family's never owned a Holden. So I sort of have this memory of my childhood of being in Fords all the time, and because of that, I liked Dick Johnson when he was racing back then because he was driving a Ford. You know what I mean? It's probably ingrained in you from a very, very young age.
I always wanted an Escort RS Cosworth. It never made it over here. Why not?
Oh, there's a couple here.
Is it?
Yeah, they're all imported.
Later on.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
I don't know why a car like that would.
That was a really off the radar
transferred.
question. It was just because you said Fords.
No, but I don't know why. It is a good question. I don't know why cars like that didn't transfer straight across at that time because they were awesome. They were a supercar killer. They were way cheaper, and I just don't understand why they didn't have more of them.
I remember my old man. He took one for a test drive, and the sales guy was in the back seat, and I was in the passenger seat. And the sales guy, I remember just looking in the rearview mirror, and you could just see him sliding to from one side of the car.
I'm just going to go over this roundabout again.
Oh, it was so good. We didn't buy it in the end. He just wanted to give it a good thrashing.
Good tyre kicking, yeah.
Nice. So I want to go back to you mentioned something earlier about how you had to pay back your leave or something, or sick pay because you took an extended amount of sick.
Yep.
That wasn't over a motorcycle accident. That was much later, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was in terms of it was probably 2.5 years after the motorcycle accident. But in terms of recovery time, I'd only been back at work, and I know this because of the timeline of it. So I'd had this job for 3 months, and because I had a 3-month probation, it was my first proper full time 9 to 5 job. You
suit up,
suit up, tie.
I'd love to see
using
that.
using a qualification I'd obtained through higher education. This is like shit. This is a career happening here. It was so 3 days to the day. I got my letter from the HR department, and that same afternoon, I found out I got a positive diagnosis for testicular cancer, which was a really short time frame. So I had, a bit of a men's health discussion here going on now. So I was. At high school, we had a sex ed class one afternoon. All the boys got put into a room and they talked about testicular cancer. Got this little flyer, how to check, what are the symptoms, a little bit more to learn about it. For whatever reason, I had kept that and I had done self-checks. It was a Saturday night. I'd had a shower and something didn't feel right. One of my testicles felt heavier than the other one. Yeah. And I went, well, it's not a lump, it's not a bump. Everyone thinks that's all it can be. I actually reread the brochure and went, well, if there's any changes in, the way they feel or anything like that. So I just went to the GP on the Monday morning, and by the Wednesday I'd got the positive diagnosis that it was cancer, and so I'd gone to a urologist and had scans and everything done as well. But yeah, that was a really, really short period of time, from finding something, like feeling 100% fit, which I was at the time, to that was like, 4 or 5 days basically. So. Wow. And that was almost immediate. So I got the diagnosis that afternoon, and 3 days later, I was in surgery, and then straight into chemo for a fairly long time, about just under 7 months.
Wow.
Of that. So again, amazing employer at the time, I'd only been there for 3 months, obviously was doing a half decent job. They said, you got no leave or anything, but there's a job here for you when you can come back. Just take, paid leave. Paid leave, I should say. Because I had no leave accrued, so they continued to pay me because I had no other way of paying for all the healthcare and everything like that. And they said basically when you come back, you can just work off your leave over a period of time. So I stayed loyal to that company for 7 years or something.
Yeah, you would do. Jeez.
And that was the boss that basically said, go and do your thing now.
Yeah, wow.
So he was pretty cool. But so that
I think we need to meet this guy.
He's a good guy. But yeah, so it was interesting. That was for someone that had never had like a sprained ankle or a broken bone in their life to within a few years have a couple of fairly major ones, which was pretty hard.
Big time.
That was very, very hard mentally. Like I didn't have to recover from surgery, which is just like getting punched really hard in the guts by someone. Basically, what you feel afterwards. But chemo and radio is a pretty hard thing to go through mentally because it sort of goes in waves. Yep. I had every 3 weeks I'd have a drug given to me that was the really bad one that would kind of cause all the hair loss and all the deterioration of your cells. And in between you'd get kind of booster shots of a couple of different things. And this is all done intravenously. You just get hooked up to a drip and literally sit in a chair reading a magazine, but you just start to get, it wears away at you and deteriorates you. And when you're at your lowest of lows, then you've got this physical thing that comes in and kind of just like hammers you down even further. So it made it very hard. At the time, they didn't really have too much in the way of support for it either. What I mean is like psychological support from it just didn't exist. And we're only talking like 2001 or 2002 here. So not too long ago. Yeah. Whereas now I actually do something very occasionally. Now I had a call from a guy in the UK the other night who's been paired with me to provide some, support basically in terms of they need to give me a call, talk about it. I've gone through it before. There's nothing taboo in terms of what we talk about. We're all adults, like it's just.
So he's going on the journey that you've been on and you're almost like a mentor.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Coach.
Exactly. There's no stupid questions.
That's awesome. That's a really good idea.
And I get access to some really good, and I've done this ever since, it comes and goes, but I get access to some really good information and that to be able to support them with statistics as well in terms of, everyone goes, cancer, fuck, I'm going to die. Yeah. It's the first thing I thought of as well.
Yeah. What's the name of that program?
Well, it was called Cancer Connect back then. It goes through many, many different things. We can get some info to link into the show description. But anyone that's going through this can talk to their oncology team and, access this network now, and it's in all states of Australia. They do it in different ways, but the idea is that they try and match someone that's roughly similar age, let's call it, but has gone through the same experience, whether it's the same cancer or same treatment. So a very, very cool program. But at that age, what made it even harder was, with all my mates, so I'd gone through this whole motorbike thing. The plan was we'd all go and get jobs and work, and then we'd go and take like a really cool holiday. Yeah. And we'd go to Europe and backpack or whatever. And we were sort of gearing up to do it, and all of my closest mates all took off and did that. They all went and did their 2-year visa thing overseas. Yep. So I was sort of like, I still had lots of friends there, but like in my mind, it was like that's what I wanted to go and do, and kind of they were all going into this. So that made it pretty hard to kind of get through that. Not having your best mates around, but still had close family and friends and everything that could still help. But man, it's a pretty ugly thing, and there's a lot of people that are going through it for a number of things. These days, cancer's pretty, unfortunately, very, very common. Yeah. But mentally, I guess I took it on like my arm recovery. To be honest, the stats of it are quite good. In terms of there was a very low mortality rate at the time for that age group. I was very fit and healthy at that point in time as well.
So how old were you? Because this was after your accident, which was 19. I
think I was, because my birthday's in December. I think I was 20 when I was diagnosed, but then was going through it when I was 21. Yeah. There's a funny story. If we have time, I'll come back to about those two. The motorcycle accident and the cancer are connected in some way, and I'll explain if I can. Going through it at that stage, and kind of going like, fuck, you're in your prime. I've just got a job. I've got all these things I want to do, and then this happens, and you can't do anything. And like it really did wipe me out in terms of physically and mentally for quite some time. And the hardest thing is as well is when you kind of, when you get the all clear, you think, fuck, this is awesome. You feel so good that you've just beaten this, and you're clear. And they go, cool, can you come back in 3 months and we'll do a checkup? So, all good, you forget about it, you go back and do your things, you get on with your life, and in 3 months' time, you go back in, you get laid on the same table, they scan you, they take all the blood tests, and they go, cool, we'll let you know in a week. So for the next 7 days, you feel like fucking shit.
Yeah.
All you can think about is like, fuck, if this happens again, like, what am I going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
And that happened for 5 years.
Far out.
So you go 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, and they go to 6 months, and they go to 12 months.
What a roller coaster.
And that's, I mean, and this still happens to this day with people going through treatment. That's something that's like, that was really hard for me to get over, to be honest, at the time, because you just crack on and get on with life, and then you just get this like big exclamation mark would just come up and just hit you in the face. You're like, fuck, if this happens again, what am I going to do? And you start trying to get ahead, like saving for a house or whatever you're doing, you just think, fuck, if this comes again, what am I actually going to do, So that was really hard, but, touch wood, I got through that. And, as I said, like if I can do something positive out of it, which I have been doing with this Cancer Connect and this sort of big brother kind of system, if I can give something back to other people going through it, whether it's a phone call or, some younger guys I've taken Ferraris to and stuff like that over the years, like younger kids that have had this, and you kind of do the Starlight Foundation things as well. Like, if I can give back where I can, I'm more than happy to, because I didn't have that, and I know it would have made a big difference.
Yeah, fair play. So after this, where's the transition, I guess, from doing your schooling, your job in IT with your suit, I guess I guess some of the challenges you've overcome, to then just doing your track days and your racing. And I mean, mate, I was looking at your Instagram page, and it looked like my wall as a kid, in terms of some of the stuff you do. Cool. So where's that transition?
When I had the proper job with a suit and tie, paying back the leave, I didn't really have any money to go racing. I certainly mentally wanted to go back and do it as soon as I could. It took a while, but what I was doing is doing the 9 to 5 job, taking annual leave occasionally, like an unpaid day of leave, to go and do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday race meeting somewhere. And it started picking up. And then when I went to the UK and came back, obviously it's the old, not what you know, it's who you know. That was very much the case with some of the poster cards you'd see on the wall, working with the brands that I do, was meeting the right person at the right time. And so with a brand like Ferrari, my first exposure with a Ferrari racing car was a friend of a friend had a Ferrari challenge for 430 challenge, a 360 challenge, so it was back then. So like, we're talking, old racing car in the common days. But he said, this guy's got a car, he's going to go into a track there, we should go out and, introduce you to him and go for a drive. And, I went for a hot lap with this guy, and I'd been racing for 15 years or whatever it was. I've been racing for all this time, and I was in the passenger seat. I'm like, I reckon I could do better than this guy. Like, with all due respect, like I was sitting there going like, I reckon I could have a crack in this thing and go half all right.
Did you have your wrist guard with your tennis ball on it?
Paddle ship, mate.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Like a forklift on the wheel. Arm was good at this point. But, we sort of, we did that. And then an opportunity came after that particular day to have a drive of that car. And I think like 3 or 4 laps in, I was quicker than the guy who owned the car. And he's like, do you want to, I'm going to do this. They used to call them, I don't know if it's still the Q1 hour. It's like a 1 hour endurance race for these cars, a 1 hour endurance race. And you'd have 2 drivers. You tended to be a gentleman driver and a pro driver or, a faster driver or whatever would get roped in to do it. Anyway, went and did that with this guy's car, and I went from being in similar races at the back of the field, driving my ass out in like MX-5s and, like little sports cars to like immediately at the front of the grid battling for people in that way. And from that came another opportunity to race someone else's car. And, and when you're at that end of the market, it's interesting in that those guys obviously have the money to pay for the cars. Like how do I find money to go racing? Paid for. Yeah. This guy's doing it because he loves doing it. You're making his experience better by getting him a big trophy at the end of the weekend by driving fast in his car. And I was like, shit, I didn't know this sort of thing existed. Like it immediately just dawned on me far out. And I mean, now that GT thing is it's a pro-am industry, it happens all over the world. And then via that, I did that with a Sydney a Sydney customer, actually. He was one of the first people in the country, I think the first, to get a car called a 458 Challenge. And I was basically tasked with helping prep the car through the Sydney dealership and coaching him to drive that car. He never raced the car, but we went and did maybe 1 or 2 days at the track every month. So I got a lot of time in that car, a lot of experience in it. That led to me going and doing coaching in those cars throughout Europe and Asia, people racing in the Ferrari Challenge Race Series. And then that grew to, many, many other things. So I guess as a kid having, F40s, and I actually had a 308 and a 328 poster as well. So a couple of Ferrari posters on the wall, and, being quasi-Italian, Ferrari was always a thing for me. So I guess I've just gravitated towards it. I'm very, very fortunate to get to do that kind of stuff as a job. We get very complacent. When I say we, guys in our industry, where we go and play with Ferraris one day and Pagani's the next and Lambos the next and McLarens, it just does become work. And every now and again you have to step back and go, we are getting to do some cool stuff, like you just tend to think of it as work every day. But it's the stuff of dreams for some people, and that becomes our work. Yeah.
You do get desensitized by it, eh?
Big time, yeah. I mean, certainly for you with some of the classic stuff, you're getting these rare, like maybe one of them in the country and very few in the world, and you're like pulling them apart,
exactly. Chucking shit out.
Yeah. Don't need that.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll look good on the wall at home.
Yeah, it's like sacrifices to the god of speed. That's it.
They say don't never meet your heroes, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever got into a car that you've been so excited, and you don't even have to name the brand if it's going to hurt, but we've driven it and you've gone, wow, this is just not what I thought. This has let me down.
Lamborghini.
Sorry. We can cut that bit out, right? There's, rather than naming a brand or a car, there are a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. When I was doing stuff with, say, Top Gear in the UK and even over here as well, you'd get handed these things that are like the latest and greatest. It's the current poster child's car. On the sheet or in the magazine, you're like, fuck, that's going to be super fast. That's going to have all these cool things, and you're driving it. Really? It's just too tame. And in naming one, a modern Nissan GTR for me is exactly that. It's vanilla. Performance is amazing. It does it. Yeah, it just does everything really, really well. And it's super, super quick. But you just get out of it going, that's good. That really impressed me. But it doesn't spark anything, whereas a car that has a good noise, is a bit more physical to drive, has a good brake pedal feel, all of those things, your five senses, let's call it. Things that tickle those five senses make for a better drive for me than something that's just clinically fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Something's just occurred to me. You keep mentioning Top Gear.
Yeah.
Were you the Stig?
Have you ever seen him in the same room?
Well, that's what I was going to say. You did put your helmet down as you walked into the studio here.
They have multiple Stigs, basically. So there's multiple people that can do the job depending on what they need to do.
He's not answered the question, has he?
No. The good thing, we'll leave you one little nugget. The good thing about the Stig is it can be anyone.
Yeah.
Right. So
wow, that's motivational.
Yeah. When you put the lid on, it could be anyone there. Indeed, if they took the lid off, it could be anyone. And if they don't know the person, if it's not someone famous, right? Like they had Michael Schumacher on once because they had his XX car on there, etc. But yeah, so in that role, it can be anyone doing what they're doing. You just have to be able to drive a car, and it's TV, right? So you can have anyone in the car, and someone else can get out. Yeah. They can edit it the way they want. That's your answer.
So I don't want to be the guy that wants to keep on bringing up hardship, but I remember a while ago you had an issue with carbon monoxide poisoning in motorsport.
Yep.
What the hell is that? What does that do to you? How did that come about? And what was your influence in changing that?
So carbon monoxide, for those that are sort of listening, is different than carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide basically comes as a result of inefficient combustible, so inefficient combustion, whether it's a wood-burning stove, an industrial generator, or in my case, a race car having a problem. I was at the Bathurst 12 Hour driving in a Ferrari when it happened, and something has happened in the car that caused, to break it down, something's happened in the car to cause an exhaust leak to happen for a start. The exhaust has to come out before something that's called a catalytic converter, which is the thing that gets rid of all this bad shit before it spits it out the back. And then it has to get into the cabin. So there's a a number of things that have to fall in the right order to make this a problem in the cars that we drive. Otherwise, everyone would get this. Everyone on the grid would get this. We did this 12-hour race. I was always set up to be the second driver to start the race, and we would normally do a double stint, meaning about 2 hours, let's call it, or a double and a half, about 2 hours 45, depending on the strategy, how it pans out at the start of the race. After about 50 minutes, the first driver came in without radioing us. He just pulled in, which is a no-go. Like, you have to coordinate it, get everything ready, get the driver, etc. Anyway, big rush, madly jumped into the car, and then I've fired out. And within about 40-odd minutes after that, I started not feeling very good at all in the car, like just feeling a bit kind of lightheaded, out of sorts. And then I realised, this might sound weird, but I realised I'd thrown up in the car. I didn't know I'd thrown up, so immediately had some consciousness to realise that I'd thrown up because I could see it on my gloves and a bit, but I wasn't conscious of actually having thrown up at the time. So I've radioed the pits and said, I've been sick in the car, I'm not feeling well, I need to come in. And that's at an area called Forest Elbow at Bathurst, which is the basically the top of the big long straight at the end of the lap, so about 2/3 of the way around. Probably a K and a half or something to the pits. I thought, until I look back at footage after this race weekend, because we have in-car cameras running the whole time, I thought I'd made that call and then I had pit the car. Turns out they had radioed back saying, we're not ready, the next driver's not ready. Do another lap. So I've gone from doing like a 2-minute 4 lap time to nearly 3 minutes in the next lap. I mean, like fifth gear, climbing up the hill, crawling, like just totally out of it. When I pulled up into pit lane, we usually have this exit procedure, which is as soon as you get into pit lane, you're starting to reset the faults in the car for the next driver, getting your belts cracked so you can just hit the quick release and you pull your helmet, all that kind of stuff. I've pulled up in third gear, stalled the car, everything's still fully attached, and they basically had to drag me out of the car, and then I've just collapsed on the garage floor. And I only know this because it was on Channel 7, like it was on the TV, sort of had the cameras rolling and everything. And there's photos and stuff of it as well. But so I had no consciousness really at that time at all. I guess muscle memory just got me back into the pits, just plodding around, thinking real time as opposed to, thinking more laterally about what's going on. But the thing is, what it does to your body is it reduces oxygen. So that's probably the first thing that I was experiencing at that point was a lack of oxygen in the body. Carbon monoxide attaches to your red blood cells, which carry oxygen around your body. So it molecularly looks the same. So it sort of suffocates you via your bloodstream. It stops oxygen getting to your organs, your brain, your lungs, other parts of your body. So I was suffering from that. But then probably worse off, and this happens to a lot of people in industrial cases where they've got generated, like something burning fuel, is the bad stuff in fuel, the heavy metals, like say if it's a lead-based fuel, or particularly we were running this stuff called ELF LMS. It's like F1 fuel, it's like rocket fuel. If you sit behind a car idling, your eyes water and stuff like that. Like it produces great horsepower. It's $9 a litre at Bathurst to get it delivered to your garage. Yeah. You use $36 a lap worth of fuel there. It's worth it though. It's good power, but it's got some scary shit in it. So what ended up happening to me after that event was I started getting the toxic part of the fuel that was in my system leaching into my body. So I started waking up with blindness in both eyes or one eye one day, horrendous like pinprick tunnel vision, literally like everything was black and I could just see these little pinpricks of light. Slurred vision, slurred speech on some days. I had a cognitive therapist doing like cognitive tests on me like quite regularly. So like a neurologist basically was doing as well. And at one point, about 7 days after it happened, they classified me as like the same sort of cognitive age as a 5-year-old. Like I couldn't do dot to dots. I couldn't like join up. So they had like a page full of numbers and I had to draw a line from like 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. And I actually noticed it before that a little bit. And it's kind of hard. It's hard to explain it to a doctor or something at the time when you're not thinking straight as well. That was the hard part. But I'd go and pay for something and my whole life I've just had this thing with like remembering number plates and phone numbers and numbers. Probably a bit Rain Man-ish, I guess you might say. But I'd hand someone money and I'd have no idea how much change I was going to get back. I'd give them like a $10 note for something worth $4.70, and I'd be like, I have no idea what they're going to give me back here, and I couldn't count it and stuff like that. So that was pretty alarming. They were doing scans of my brain and it was showing up like brain damage. Like visually, it was showing up the same as if someone's had a massive blow to the head, like bruising and shadowing on parts of the brain, like front and back hemisphere and everything. And aside from that, it was affecting livers and other things. I was getting really bad counts in liver and kidney and everything at the time as well. So it's really, it's really yucky stuff. Our sport's heavily unregulated for that sort of thing. It becomes a big work cover and work safe issue, when they try and do it. All the stuff that we have for a chef in a kitchen or a carbon monoxide alarm you would get from, Bunnings or whatever to put, like in the mining or whatever, we blow those things out of the ballpark. We start a car in a garage and they just go ballistic straight away. But that's considered the Australian standard that's safe for people to work in. Yet we have that in race cars all the time. But as I said at the start, unless this, collection of problems existed, it should never affect you inside the car. You've got air conditioning and helmet venting and everything, but there was a number of problems that resulted in that being a problem for me. So to come back to the other part of your question, though, in terms of what I've done since, so my background's been in engineering and IT, so I'm pretty good with designing stuff and making stuff electronically as well. I actually made a carbon monoxide sensor that you can attach to the CAN bus, which is like the little network inside the car that all the things talk to, to enable you to log and set alarms and stuff on the dashboard of a race car. Because it occurred to me once I started recovering from this is we have in a modern GT car somewhere between 120 and 140 channels of data, looking at like basically you fart in the car and it knows how loud it was. Like everything is sensed. Anything that moves, heats up, rotates, has a measurement inside the car. Even electrical pulses to things are measured. Why have we not got something in there to make sure the driver doesn't die while they're driving the car? Like simple as that. Like why do we not have that? To this point now in Formula One, I don't know if you guys know this, but in the fingertips of their gloves, they have pulse oximetry, so they can check blood oxygen and pulse in the fingertips of the F1 drivers' gloves. Really? Real time.
When was that brought in?
Maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's 2 years ago or something like that.
Pretty epic that they kind of have it to that level at a much smaller. Mine's the size of a small fridge that what I've made. It's very, very, very amateur. No, it's small, but it's amazing that they've got it to that sort of level that quickly. But yeah, it just occurred to me, why do we not log this and alarm this on the car? For two parts, there's live telemetry back to the pits. So when I'm poorly communicating to my engineer on the radio and he doesn't know if it's because I'm hot and bothered or I'm in the middle of a dice or whatever, or I'm breathing in harmful shit, they can see these numbers back in the pit garage and go like, get out of the car. And unfortunately, it never got mandated to be in cars because of this whole work cover thing. It blows the whole thing out of proportion. But what happened is they provided recommendations to teams. So the following year at the 12-hour, we had a document that was given to every team, every driver about it, awareness of it, what it can do, and also it changed the way in which they treat people in the medical centre, because every racetrack has not necessarily an operating theatre, Bathurst does, but a medical centre with professionals there to help you if you have an accident or whatever. Yeah. And they didn't really have anything at the time properly set up to deal with carbon monoxide, which the primary thing you have to do is with a loss of oxygen, put someone on bottled oxygen straight away, a really rich high flow of oxygen, and it kind of shreds it out of your system as best as possible. The sooner you can get onto that, the better it is for your health outcomes.
So am I right in thinking this was the kind of first time something like this had ever happened, or was your case quite severe?
No, it had happened before. A year before, believe it or not, a guy called Greg Crick was driving an SLS Mercedes. They've got different cars. So Mercedes has got the front engine. We have mid-engine, so engine's behind the driver with the exhaust at the back. The Mercedes has the engine in front and the pipes come out just next to the front doors. So one pipe each side of the engine. He'd had a bit of an altercation. I don't know if it was with another car or something, but anyway, it had managed to pierce a section of the footwell, like the inside of the car was exposed to the outside of the car, and at the same time it had bent part of the exhaust and cracked the exhaust. So it was just pumping straight out of that header pipe into there. So I had, a year before someone had it quite badly.
Right.
And I actually, through a couple of connections, got a chance to speak to him, find out which doctors he's talking to, try and accelerate my recovery, find out what he's done in that past year and what's his learnings. Got to speak to his doctor who was based in Tasmania and it went from there. And even, in my own research of this, in America, like NASCAR's huge, big crowds, there's a track they've got, the name escapes me, it might be Bristol. It's a really steep, short track. It's like a 400-metre oval. And they limit the number of cars there. It's always run under lights. But it's like, if you put it to Australian terms, it's like Lang Park in Brisbane. It's like super steep grandstands, super steep track, but it's all really contained. They were having races a few years ago where hundreds of people in the crowd were getting dizzy and basically passing out as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning because they'd run in colder climates at night time sometimes, and obviously the denser air meant that it would keep it all enclosed. So there was evidence of this happening in other parts of modern sport around the world, and they changed a whole bunch of things to try and improve that at those circuits. But also when I was reading other stuff, it got me thinking about the red mist that we call in motorsport, like helmet goes on, brain falls out, people do stupid shit in cars. I wonder if in the older racing, certainly where there was a lot less of carbon filters in helmets and things going on now, how much of it was actually that, you see these photos of Fangio and that getting out of cars and Jack Brabham and everything, faces fully covered in black shit off their own car, right? Because they're sitting behind the carburetors and the exhaust.
Yeah, I've noticed that,
How much of that was actually as a result of, that potentially being a problem back then? Because it's always around, like carbon monoxide's existed before humans did. It's just different things producing it. So, maybe wonder how much that red mist stuff is as a result of it. Denny Holmes, a famous death that happened at Bathurst, there's a lot of literature suggesting that may have been a cause of his death. They said it was a heart attack, but it actually may have been brought on by this, massive distress in the body. Yeah, wow. So, it's a when I do something, I do it to its extreme. Yeah.
I'm picking up on that as well.
Yeah. But it's again with that, like I looked at it and said, like, why aren't we doing, like, as an industry and as a sport, why aren't we doing something, about this? Yeah. Like if a football player ran onto the pitch and there was something that could potentially end their life while they're running around on the field and it was preventable, you think like the football teams wouldn't do something about it? It just sort of amazes me that as a sport we haven't done more towards that, to be honest. But I mean, F1 is certainly making ground on the biometrics of drivers a lot more, and that can certainly filter down, like you said before with road cars, that tech can filter down into the sport as well, I'm sure.
Why do they weigh drivers after a race?
It's the minimum weight for the car and the regulations is a combination of the car, its fuel, its tyres and the driver as well. So they weigh them independently because of the timing of like the live press conference and the podium and everything. They park the cars in what's called parc fermé. They go and weigh the drivers to document that. They go and do their TV stuff and the podium and everything. Then they technically scrutineer the car to make sure it's within the rules, and then add up the weights and everything and make sure it's legit. And if it's not, they tend to have 4th and 5th place there because if there's protests, they also check those drivers as well.
Okay, they chuck a watch on them, put the hat on them, then they go and drink some champagne.
They genuinely like old stuff. There's a lot of stories and a lot of anecdotes people talk about where they would get out of the car and go up and hug the team, and the team would slip like a couple of spanners in their pockets and stuff like that. No joke. There's a lot of that around where they would go and throw stuff in, or they'd go and immediately hug the team and then scull like a bottle of water or whatever, so they'd have another 600 grams or whatever in their 100%, body.
That was the Italians.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, you said you might touch on that story, and I'm sorry to keep bringing stuff up that. You said there was a connection between your motorbike. I don't think I've forgotten, mate.
It's actually a light-hearted connection as well. So
that's what she said.
I used to go all out. In that era, it was like 18th and 21st and stuff. All your mates are having parties, and I'd go all out in. Everyone was having costume parties of some sort, whatever the theme was. So I went to a mate's, this is 6 months before I had the motorbike accident. I went as a crash test dummy to the party, right? And then I had this massive shunt. Everyone's like, fuck, do you remember you had that costume? I'm like, funny coincidence kind of thing. Not long after, I went to a party. It was a 60s party or something, and I took that literally and said, well, back then I was sperm, so I'm going to go as sperm. So I've gone as sperm to this party, and 3 months after that, I've had testicular cancer.
Well, mate, that's a life lesson. Stop going to dress up parties, mate. Far out.
No more costumes ever since then. But it took one of my mates to sort of bring that up. Back when it was happening in the day, it was a sort of a light spin on it, but it was pretty fun. I'm like, I'll be very considerate of what I'm wearing in the future.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, look, thanks for coming in, Ren. First of all, how do people get in contact with you?
Through social media is probably the easiest way. I think Renato Loberto is just my tag in my account in Instagram and Facebook. Certainly, if there's anyone out there listening that's sort of going through any of those health considerations and wants to have a chat, just send me a direct message on there and be in touch and try and help them out with whatever I can.
Yeah, nice. Thanks very much for coming in.
Mate, great to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to stop by on Lifestyle Pirates.
Thanks, John. And good luck to you guys as well. Listen to the first episode the other week. Awesome what you're doing. Keep at it. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Man.
Cheers.